Hi everyone. We are ready for section 2.5. 2.5 is a little bit different. We've been solving equations, we've had fractions in our equations, we've had variables on both sides of the equation, and solving. This section's a little interesting. It's something different that you may not have done before. We are going to solve equations involving absolute value. We're also going to do some absolute value evaluating and solving. So we got kind of a couple things that we need to deal with here. So first of all, absolute value itself is how far a number is from 0 on the number line. We don't care what direction, so we don't deal with positives or negatives. It's just how far it is. So in other words, 3 on a number line is 3 units away from 0. Well, -3 on a number line is also 3 units away from 0. So we don't care if we're going in the positive or negative direction. We only care that the absolute value of -3 is 3, and the absolute value of +3 is 3. So when we evaluate an absolute value expression, we need to make sure we take that into account. So if you didn't notice, or if you're not sure, the symbol for absolute value are it's almost like brackets. They serve like parentheses, but they're straight bars on either side, and you can see it in that example that I have at the bottom of this page. So we do the math inside the absolute value sign, we take the absolute value, and then we finish the problem. So if we're going to evaluate an expression, we're going to use substitution with the value that's given. We're going to evaluate using order of operations, and I want to make a note, absolute value sign, I'll put equals, is the same as parentheses. And don't forget to take the absolute value when it tells you to. So, you know, when we talked about associative property, we talked about grouping symbols. Well, absolute value sign is another grouping symbol besides parentheses. So this example I've got, 23 minus the absolute value of 3 minus 4x if x equals 2. Evaluate. Notice whenever we evaluate, we're given an expression, no equal sign. We're going to just put that value in and get an answer. So I'm going to take this 2. Wherever I see an x, I'm going to substitute that in. So I'm going to have a 23 minus 3 minus, whoops, that should be a 4, making up numbers, 4 times 2 and absolute value. We're still going to follow the order of operations. So we did substitution. Order of operations says parentheses first. Parentheses, our absolute value sign is standing in for those. So in our parentheses, we've got a 3 minus 4 times 2. We can do the subtract or the multiply first. Right, so we've got 3 minus 8 in the absolute value. So now we're going to just keep working away. So we've still got a 23 minus, only I'm going to finish this math problem. It's 3 minus 8. -5, right? Now, remember to take the absolute value. We're done with everything in the parentheses slash absolute value sign except for taking the absolute value of -5. Well, how far away is -5 from 0? It's 5 units. So this -5 with the absolute value becomes a 5. Everything else comes straight down. So it's still a minus in here, even though we don't do negatives when we're dealing with absolute value. The minus came from outside of the absolute value sign. So I'm going to say that my final answer for this one is going to be 18. So that's evaluating. So check the directions. Evaluate is when we're going to substitute, we're going to do some math. Now we're going to solve an equation. So solving an equation means we're going to get like x has to be equal to 12 or something like that. So our first thing we're going to do is isolate the absolute value if we need to. I think over on the side I'm going to do this problem because it's a good example for us to do. So if I've got this problem, 2 times the absolute value of f plus 5 equals 34. I'll just rewrite it. Is my absolute value sign all by itself, or do I have a plus or a multiplier, divide, or something on the same side with it? I know that we're looking to isolate the variable, right? But the variable's inside the absolute value sign. So in order to get to the variable, we have to get rid of the absolute value sign. So I need to get rid of this 2. It's 2 times that absolute value. So how do I get rid of a 2 times? I divide by 2. These 2's will cross out, and I'm left with an f plus 5 in the absolute value sign. 34 divided by 2 should be a 17. Now my absolute value sign is isolated. I don't have any pluses, timesing, anything like that. I got rid of the numbers that were outside of the absolute value sign. After that, we're going to split the problem into 2 pieces. This is an interesting part, because you know how I said that the absolute value sign could be, or absolute value, it could be a positive or a negative direction. So we're going to have 2 answers. We're going to split the problem into 2 pieces to get them. We're going to use one positive answer and one negative answer. So that f plus 5 that I've got over here on the side with the absolute value equals 17, let's branch that off into 2 places. It could be a positive 17, it could be a negative 17. So I'm going to eliminate the absolute value sign and do f plus 5 equals positive 17, f plus 5 equals a negative 17. So one positive answer, which was a 17, one negative answer, which was a negative 17. And then from there, we're going to solve, and we could write our answers in set notation. I'm not going to be super picky about this, but I want to show you what it looks like. So if I've got 2 separate equations, f plus 5 equals 17, I'm going to subtract 5, and that gives me an f equals 12. Well, over on this other side, other equation we've got, f plus 5 equals negative 17, I'm still going to subtract 5, and I'm going to have an f equals negative 22. So here are my 2 answers. So make yourself a little note. Whenever you solve an absolute value equation, you 99.72% of the time get 2 answers. In our case, it's a negative 22 and a positive 12. Sometimes they're positive, sometimes they're negative. Your final answer, there is no sense to it. Where we do the positive and negative is going to be right here. And you don't have to write positive 17 for that one, but I wanted you to see where it came from. All right. So we just did practice problem number 1. Let's do practice problem number 2. I've got a y plus 2 in absolute value sign minus 5 equals negative 1. Well, the first thing you should ask yourself, do we need to isolate the absolute value sign, or is it already by itself? Hopefully you're telling me there's a minus 5 on the same side of the equal sign, so we need to get rid of that minus 5. We all know the inverse for subtracting 5 is adding 5. So now I'm left with a y plus 2 in the absolute value sign equals negative 1 plus 5 is a 4. Now that I've got the absolute value sign isolated, I know I'm going to have to split this into 2 pieces. So I'm going to have myself a y plus 2 equals a positive 4. A y plus 2 equals a negative 4. And now this is a really easy equation to solve, right? Subtract 2, I get y equals 2. Subtract 2, and I'm going to have a negative 6 for my second answer. If I'm going to write those in set notation, I'd write negative 6, 2. I always write them in order from least to greatest, but if you had them both there, it wouldn't matter. The trickiest part is to remember to split it up into 2 separate pieces. There is one trick problem, and I'm going to refer to problem number 3 for it. Notice how problem number 3, it says we could take the absolute value of 3n minus 4, and that should equal a negative 1. Well, anytime we take an absolute value of a number, do we ever get a negative? Can't happen, right? There's no such thing as the absolute value that you get a negative answer unless we did something crazy with the problem. But, move that a little bit. No solution is you can't take the absolute value of a number and get a negative answer. So you could save yourself some work here. If you look at problem number 3 and it says the absolute value of 3n minus 4 equals -1, you could be like, can't happen. You can never take the absolute value and get a negative answer, so you know your answer for problem number 3 is no solution. We've got a few word problems here. Let's skip these. Let's talk about these in class, I think. So, lesson summary. What's the most important thing to remember when solving an absolute value equation? I know what I think is the most important thing to remember, but perhaps you have something else, but something that you need to remember when you're solving one of those equations. I can actually think of a couple things that could happen. And I've just got an evaluate. So this isn't solve. So you're going to just substitute that -4 into that into that absolute value expression and give me a final answer. That is it for section 2.5. Have a fabulous day. We'll see you next time, 2.6.